When people talk about the true final goodbye with a narcissist, what they're really pointing to is the exact moment that person can no longer sustain the illusion that they're the one running the show. For years, sometimes for decades, the entire relationship has orbited around a single dynamic: control. And not always the obvious kind, not always the version where they dictate your every move, though that happens plenty. It runs far deeper than that. It's psychological. It's the quiet, constant sense that they are the gravitational center of your world, that your thoughts, your moods, your choices only make sense in relation to them. That structure is what keeps a narcissist functioning. It's their fuel source. So when you finally deliver a real goodbye, not a dramatic exit followed by circling back, not a temporary silence, but a full and complete withdrawal, the entire system they've built comes apart at the seams. To understand why this hits them so hard, you have to understand something fundamental about how these people are wired. Their identity was never built on solid ground. A psychologically healthy person, even in the middle of rejection or abandonment, has some kind of internal scaffolding to lean on: values, goals, relationships, a sense of self that doesn't depend entirely on outside validation. That scaffolding helps them survive loss. A narcissist doesn't have it. What they have instead is something closer to a hall of mirrors, an identity stitched together entirely from other people's attention and admiration reflecting back at them. Take those mirrors away and there's nothing left standing. So the final goodbye isn't just an emotional blow to them, it's existential. It threatens the very thing they've spent their whole life protecting. It feels to them like a kind of death because the persona they've built cannot survive without an audience to witness it. That's exactly why losing power terrifies them so completely. Power was never a side detail in how they related to you. It was the entire foundation, their actual lifeline. The connection was never really rooted in love or genuine care. It was about pulling you into their orbit, keeping you tethered, because that tether is what made them feel solid, made them feel real. But the second that tether snaps, the moment you walk away and refuse to be reeled back in, they're left facing themselves. And that is the one thing they cannot tolerate. They cannot bear their own company. They cannot sit still with the emptiness that surfaces once the performance stops. Now, it's worth noting that not every goodbye triggers this kind of implosion. Plenty of people leave, but stay emotionally entangled, still fighting, still responding, still getting pulled into the back and forth. Ironically, that keeps the narcissist fed, because even hostility is a form of connection. But a true, clean break is different. It removes even that last thread, the silence, the absence, the flat refusal to re-engage with the cycle. That's what actually dismantles their sense of dominance. Picture a predator that suddenly loses its prey. It doesn't calmly move along to the next thing. It thrashes, it panics because its entire sense of purpose was tied to the chase. In much the same way, a narcissist's identity depends on your participation in their story. Once that participation ends, they're left exposed, stripped bare. It isn't just that they've lost you, it's that they've lost the entire framework that made them feel powerful, significant, alive. That collapse tends to arrive with a theatrical outpouring of emotion, fury, denial, threats of revenge, sudden, desperate pleading. But underneath all the different masks, it's the same raw panic every time. They can't come to terms with losing control because what's actually collapsing isn't just the relationship, it's their entire architecture of self. The final goodbye exposes the truth plainly. They were never actually in charge to begin with. And here's the twist worth sitting with. The very thing they cling to hardest, their sense of power, is exactly what slips through their fingers the instant you leave for good. Their frantic attempts to hold on only expose how fragile they really are underneath. What looks like dominance was never strength. It was weakness wearing a costume. The final goodbye rips that costume off. So when the relationship truly ends, when the last card has been played and there's no walking it back, the narcissist doesn't experience simple sadness or garden variety anger. They experience something closer to devastation, the crumbling of a carefully constructed world where they always sat at the center. That's why they fight the ending with such intensity, and why letting it stand feels unbearable to them. The uncomfortable truth is that losing power isn't just their worst fear, it's inevitable. No illusion, however elaborately built, can sustain itself forever. And when it finally caves in, when you step away for good, you uncover the deepest reality of all. Their power was never real to begin with. That final goodbye doesn't just end a relationship, it ends the fiction. And in that moment, you're the one who becomes free, while they're left to confront the one opponent they can never defeat, themselves. Once you reach that point of true finality with a narcissist, the first thing that tends to surface isn't just the disintegration of their control. It's a wave of rage that follows close behind. It helps to understand that this isn't ordinary anger. Ordinary anger tends to be proportionate. It shows up when someone feels wronged or hurt, and it usually gets expressed, resolved, and released. Narcissistic rage operates on a completely different level. It erupts from somewhere much darker and more fragile. It's the reaction of someone whose entire sense of self has just been struck at its most vulnerable point. What makes this rage so severe is that the narcissist doesn't experience your departure as simple rejection. They experience it as betrayal. And betrayal in their mind isn't just painful, it's intolerable. It shatters the story they've told themselves about being superior, irreplaceable, permanent. They believed they were essential, that you orbited around them the way planets orbit a star. Your leaving disproves that entirely, and rather than sit with that reality, they lash out. This reaction is predictable for a simple reason. Narcissists have never developed a healthy way of processing difficult emotions. Somewhere in childhood, many of them learned to cope with shame, abandonment, or feeling insignificant by constructing a false, inflated persona, an exaggerated performance of confidence and importance. That performance becomes armor. But once the final goodbye pierces through it, all the old, unresolved wounds they've been hiding come flooding to the surface. Rage becomes their shield, their way of deflecting a truth they cannot absorb, that they were never actually in control, and their grand self-image was always a fabrication. That's why the rage shows up in so many different forms. Sometimes it's loud and explosive, shouting, insults, threats. Other times it's cold and calculated, the silent treatment, spreading rumors, trying to turn mutual friends against you. And sometimes it's disguised as victimhood, where they claim they've been the wronged party all along, generating sympathy to mask their fury underneath. All of these reactions trace back to the same core wound. They cannot tolerate the fact that you're no longer willing to play your assigned role in their story. What often stands out most is how disproportionate the reaction feels from the outside. You might wonder, why does someone care this much about a breakup? Why does one goodbye provoke such ferocity? Here's the key to understanding it. You're not witnessing a reaction to the simple fact of someone leaving. You're witnessing the collapse of a fabricated identity in real time. That's why it feels to them like the end of everything. Your goodbye isn't experienced as one person exiting another person's life. In their mind, it's the collapse of their entire universe. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of fury, you know how disorienting it can be. The intensity of their anger can make you question yourself, wonder if maybe you really are the villain they're painting you as. That confusion is part of the trap. Their rage isn't purely emotional, it's strategic. It's designed to pull you back into old patterns, back into the cycle where you react, and they hold the power. That's exactly why staying grounded in the face of that rage is so difficult and so essential. What matters most to understand is that their anger was never really about you. It's about them, about the void that opens up the moment you're no longer there to fill it. So they project that void onto you, blaming you, accusing you, attacking you, because that's far easier than confronting the emptiness underneath. Once you can see it clearly, not as a verdict on your worth, but as a mirror reflecting their own fragility, you start to step outside the game entirely. And here's something worth reflecting on. Their rage is, in a strange way, a confession. It reveals exactly what they've worked so hard to conceal. Beneath all that outward bravado, the fury exposes something raw and honest. They're terrified of becoming irrelevant, terrified of being abandoned, terrified of facing themselves without someone else there to reflect back the grandiose image they need to survive. That rage is the mask slipping, their weakness on full display at the exact moment they're trying hardest to appear powerful. This is why the finality of the goodbye changes everything. When you hold steady through that storm, when you refuse to be manipulated back into the old dynamic, you're not simply walking away from them, you're forcing them to confront their deepest fear. And in doing that, you reclaim something they never wanted you to hold on to: your independence, your resilience, your capacity to walk away intact. So hold on to this. Their rage isn't evidence of power, it's evidence of desperation. Once you see that clearly, it loses its grip on you. Narcissistic rage is really just the sound of a fabricated identity cracking apart. And your silence in response proves once and for all that their control over you has ended. Once the initial explosion of rage has either burned out or cooled into something quieter, narcissists typically shift into an entirely new mode of operation, a calculated effort to regain their lost influence. It doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's manipulative in quieter ways, wrapped in sentimentality or nostalgia. But the underlying motive stays the same: pull you back into their orbit. To understand this phase, you need to recognize that narcissists never viewed the relationship as an equal exchange of love and respect. To them, relationships function as transactions of power, a game where their sense of importance is continuously fed by your attention, your emotional energy, and your willingness to comply. When you leave, you cut off that supply, and that creates what psychologists refer to as a narcissistic injury. That injury is intolerable to them, so their mind immediately starts scheming ways to reverse it. After a breakup, some narcissistic individuals may try to regain influence through tactics often called hoovering, such as charm, guilt, or intimidation, rather than demonstrating genuine change. If those efforts fail, they may attempt to control the narrative by portraying themselves as the victim or criticizing the other person, a behavior sometimes described as a smear campaign. Maintaining firm boundaries, evaluating actions rather than promises, and recognizing consistent patterns can help prevent being drawn back into unhealthy relationship dynamics. So rather than confront that reality, they set out to construct an alternate one. They cast you as the villain, the abuser, the unstable party. This serves a dual purpose. It protects their reputation in front of others, and it shields them from having to face the truth about who they actually are. What makes the smear campaign particularly insidious is that it preys on one of the most basic human instincts, the desire to be understood. Most people, when falsely accused, want to defend themselves, want to set the record straight, want to prove they aren't what they're being accused of. But here's where the narcissist holds the advantage. The harder you fight to defend yourself, the more entangled you become in the very narrative they've constructed. It becomes a trap. You burn your energy fighting lies while they sit back, watching the resulting drama seemingly validate their story. Look, they say, look how emotional, how erratic, how obsessed this person is. There's something important to recognize in this pattern. Lies don't need to be true in order to be effective. They only need repetition, a handful of believers, and the ability to create doubt. A narcissist instinctively understands this without ever being taught. They're not concerned with truth, they're concerned with perception. And in their world, perception is everything. If they can convince others that you're the problem, they reclaim a sense of power, even if it only exists inside their own mind. From a psychological lens, this is projection in its purest form. Every trait they fear seeing in themselves, control, cruelty, dishonesty, gets projected onto you. In doing so, they craft a distorted mirror where they remain the hero of the story and you become the villain. This lets them preserve their illusion of superiority while avoiding any real accountability. If you've ever been the target of this kind of campaign, you understand just how painful it is. It isn't only the loss of the relationship that hurts, it's watching people you care about grow distant because they've absorbed a false version of events. It can feel like a second betrayal, one that cuts at your very identity. But this is precisely where strength needs to rise above the impulse to react. The most effective response to a smear campaign isn't retaliation, it's standing firmly in your own truth. That doesn't mean staying completely silent in the face of every lie, but it does mean refusing to get pulled into the theater the narcissist has spent so long constructing. Consistency speaks far louder than accusations ever could. The people who genuinely know you, who've watched your character and actions over time, will eventually see through the distortion. And those who don't, those who quickly believe the narcissist's version of events, reveal far more about themselves than they do about you. There's a deeper lesson embedded in all of this about resilience. A narcissist's smear campaign exposes not only their desperation, but also potentially your own dependence on outside validation. When you learn to stand securely in who you are, without needing outside approval to confirm it, you take away one of their most potent weapons. Because what is a lie really worth if it fails to provoke a reaction? What is gossip worth if you refuse to let it define you? In the end, the smear campaign says far more about their inability to face the truth than it does about you. It's their way of shouting into the void, insisting the world accept their version of events, because the alternative, the reality that they were the one left behind, that their carefully built mask finally slipped, is simply too much for them to bear. After the anger has burned itself out, after the attempts to win you back have failed, and even after the smear campaign has run its course, there's often a quieter, more insidious stage that follows. The narcissist retreats into self-pity and plays the victim. At first, it might look like remorse. It might even sound like accountability. They'll say things like, I don't understand why everyone always leaves me, or nobody ever really understands who I am. To someone unfamiliar with the pattern, it can sound like authentic emotion. But more often than not, it's just another form of control, a final attempt to reclaim some power by casting themselves as the tragic figure in the story. Why does this happen? Because once every other strategy has failed, the rage, the charm, the threats, the manipulation, the narcissist is left with one tool that reliably works on empathetic, caring people: guilt. They understand that if they can generate sympathy, if they can position themselves as the wounded party who's been abandoned, they might still be able to tug at your compassion. It's an appeal aimed directly at the heart rather than logic. And for many people, particularly those naturally inclined to feel deeply for others, this becomes the hardest trap of all to avoid. But here's the crucial distinction. Self-pity used as a manipulation tactic by a narcissist is not the same thing as genuine vulnerability. Real vulnerability involves honesty, humility, and a genuine willingness to confront one's own flaws. It's open, reflective, self-aware. Narcissistic self-pity works in the opposite direction. It's entirely self-focused. It isn't about facing the truth, it's about avoiding it altogether. Instead of saying, "I hurt you and I need to understand why I behave this way," they say, "Everyone always betrays me. Everyone always leaves." That small shift in language matters enormously. One statement accepts responsibility, the other deflects it entirely. This retreat into victimhood serves multiple purposes at once. It protects their ego by allowing them to sidestep accountability. If they're the victim, they never have to confront the shame of having caused the breakup themselves. It also helps preserve their public image. People unfamiliar with the full story may feel sympathy for them, offering exactly the attention and admiration they lost when you walked away. And perhaps most significantly, it gives them a version of events they can actually live with, because admitting that you left as a direct result of their behavior would force them to face the very truth they've built their entire life around avoiding, their own brokenness. Psychologically speaking, this is where blame and denial intersect. The narcissist pushes responsibility outward, onto you, onto circumstance, onto bad luck, while simultaneously refusing any internal accountability. It's an emotional maneuver, and it works surprisingly well on people wired for empathy, because our natural instinct upon seeing someone in apparent pain is to want to ease it. What the narcissist has discovered is that if they can convincingly perform the role of the sufferer, they can retain people around them, even if it's only out of pity. But here's where clear thinking becomes essential. Real compassion, difficult as this may sound, sometimes means declining to participate in someone else's self-destructive pattern. If you allow yourself to be drawn back in by performances of self-pity, you're not actually helping the narcissist at all. You're enabling them. You're reinforcing the very patterns that keep them locked in their distorted self-image. And meanwhile, you lose pieces of yourself in the process, sacrificing hard-earned freedom for an emotional performance that was never rooted in truth to begin with. So the real challenge becomes learning to distinguish between authentic vulnerability and manipulative victimhood. That requires both courage and clarity. It means asking yourself honestly, is this person genuinely taking ownership of their actions, or are they simply fishing for sympathy? Are they opening themselves up to real growth, or are they clinging to their old illusions by recruiting you as their emotional caretaker? These aren't easy questions because narcissists are remarkably skilled at blurring these lines. But once you recognize the pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. And what becomes clear is this: their victimhood isn't evidence of innocence. It's evidence of their refusal to face reality. They would rather live permanently as the wronged party than confront the discomfort of true accountability. And in making that choice, they reveal the very essence of narcissism itself, an unrelenting avoidance of truth, no matter the cost it inflicts on themselves or the people around them. So when you witness this stage unfolding, remember that your compassion is a gift, not an obligation. You don't owe it to someone who only exploits it to sustain harmful cycles. Real strength lies in holding on to your compassion without sacrificing your clarity. And genuine freedom arrives when you can look directly at their self-pity, recognize it for exactly what it is, and refuse to let it pull you back under. When every other tactic has been exhausted, the rage, the charm offensives, the smear campaigns, the self-pity, there's a final stage that arrives, and in many ways it's the most unsettling of all. The narcissist withdraws into something that looks like acceptance, but is really a hollowed-out version of it. This isn't genuine acceptance, not in the way a psychologically healthy person processes loss and integrates it into their life with meaning. Instead, it's a defensive retreat, a quiet sulking that masks unresolved turmoil underneath. From the outside, it might appear as though they've finally let go, but beneath that surface calm, there's neither peace nor personal growth. It's simply exhaustion, a temporary pause born out of defeat rather than wisdom. It's important to draw a clear line here. Acceptance and transformation are not the same thing. When someone genuinely comes to terms with the end of a relationship, they grieve, they reflect, and if they're being honest with themselves, they grow from it. There's humility woven into that process, and humility is exactly what allows meaning to emerge from suffering. A narcissist, though, avoids humility at every turn. Their version of acceptance isn't grounded in self-reflection, it's grounded in self-preservation. They stop fighting not because they've arrived at some deeper truth, but because every other strategy has been exhausted. It's the collapse of the performance, not the beginning of insight. Thought through simply, this might be where the underlying tragedy of narcissism becomes most visible. Human beings are naturally built to adapt. We fall down, we stumble, but we're capable of learning from it. We can transform pain into something that pushes us forward. Narcissism interrupts that entire process because the ego underneath is too fragile to withstand the weight of genuine accountability. The narcissist cannot convert their suffering into wisdom. So instead, they settle into a narrative of futility. They tell themselves the relationship was never worth the effort, or that you weren't worth pursuing, or that life itself is simply unfair and stacked against them. In doing this, they numb themselves against the sting of reality, but in the process, they also shut the door on any real growth. This particular stage is strange because on one hand, it can look like you've finally found peace with the situation. The narcissist goes quiet, withdraws, stops making accusations or stirring up drama around your name. But on the other hand, this isn't real closure. It's more like a performance of closure, staged for the benefit of appearances, both in front of others and within the private theater of their own mind. That distinction matters enormously because once you understand it, you stop waiting for their silence to mean something it doesn't. You stop mistaking their apparent calm for reconciliation. And this is where the real challenge lies for you, resisting the urge to interpret their stillness as proof that everything has finally been resolved. Their quiet isn't peace, it's dormancy. It's an emotional pause that only lasts as long as they see no realistic opportunity to regain power. If a new chance arises, a way to hurt you, to pull you back in, or to reclaim some form of dominance, they'll typically seize it without hesitation. Their acceptance, in other words, isn't the conclusion of the story. It's simply an intermission. So what do you do with that understanding? You recognize that genuine closure was never going to come from them. It comes from you. It comes from refusing to outsource your sense of resolution to someone who has spent their entire life avoiding the truth. The responsibility, heavy as it may feel, is to build meaning for yourself out of the wreckage, to examine what happened, extract the lessons buried in it, face the pain honestly, and keep moving forward in a way they simply cannot. That's what sets you apart from them. That's what transforms the ending into something more than just despair. If you're holding out hope that the narcissist will one day meet you in a place of mutual reflection and honesty, you'll be waiting indefinitely. Their version of acceptance will always ring hollow because it was never rooted in truth to begin with. It's rooted in preserving an image. But your acceptance, if you choose to claim it, can be something entirely different. It can be grounded in clarity, in the deliberate decision to stop participating in the game altogether. Not because you were defeated, but because you've outgrown it completely. That's the real difference between living inside denial and living inside truth. And that brings us to the essential point. The story truly ends the moment you stop needing their closure and start generating your own. When you no longer mistake their silence for wisdom, when you no longer confuse their withdrawal with genuine peace, you step into something far deeper, real freedom. It's the freedom that comes from finally recognizing that the narcissist's so-called acceptance is just one more mask, and you were never obligated to play along with it in the first place.